Good evening. Welcome to Investigator News. I'm your host, Ellie, and we have William's show coming up. Um, Karen, can you hear me at this point? We're doing a sound check before I bring William in, and William is going to go ahead and has a really big show for you guys. Karen, can you hear me? Sound. Okay. So let me, I'm going to call William and, oh, looky there. We have William and down there, and I'm gonna give him a call and tell him we got sound. All right, you guys are gonna hear me calling him. Everybody,
Okay.
we have sound. So I sound horrible. Yes, we got three people. It says we've got sound. So William, here you go. So start your report all over again, and I'm going to move out of the way.
All right. Let me wipe my nose here. Sorry, kids. So, this is the William Green Report for news of the weekend here on Investigator News 2. You've probably already been listening to Ellie. I'm trying to, yep, here I am. Yep, I can hear myself. That's interesting. Okay, so Ellie's going to be back with us on Thursday, and you may see me tomorrow evening. And Ellie's been involved with getting ready for travel, and she's going to be traveling till Thursday. Okay. It's the 22nd of May, and we're going to be getting ready for Memorial Day next weekend. I hope everybody's going to enjoy that. Let's think about earthquakes here. I'm looking at the Force 13 site, and I'm going to talk about the big 6 earthquakes here. We have the Gizo, Solomon Islands had a 5.3 today. Haifo, Tonga, had a 5.1. Toshima, Japan, at just a mile and a quarter deep, had a 5.1 near Hiroshima where the G7 met. I wonder what that may mean. The Loyalty Islands had a 5.5. Now, if you wonder where the Loyalty Islands, it's right between Australia and New Zealand, or Aussie land and New Zealand. There was a 5.2 in the Banda Sea, and that's just on the Indian Ocean side of Indonesia. And at Margarita, yeah, with an H, in India, they had a 5.0. So those are the big fivers. Now, in the last 4 days, there was a major uptick on the 19th of earthquakes in general, and then it sloped down towards today. But the strength of the fewer earthquakes towards today is on the rise. So that's pretty important. Let's see. 4 days ago, there was a 7.7 magnitude in the South Pacific, and there was a tsunami warning. Let's see what else I've got going here. In Romania, they just had a 4.3 in Tarragova, Romania, and there was also one in Albania. I think it was 2.1 or so. So that's what we've got going on in the world right now. Now there's a volcano, Mount Etna, erupted, and there was the airport nearby was in Catania, They suspended the local airport. Also, the airport in Mexico City was suspended from a volcano eruption there. And we had a whole bunch of 2.5s and such in the volcano there in Hawaii, actually in the volcano at Kilauea. All right, that is my seismic report, I guess is what we'll call it. Okay, Ellie asked me to look into this report in the Western Journal. Now, see if anybody has. Hiya, Karen. Okay. Moving on. So U.S. senators are being issued satellite telephones in preparation for a, quote, disruptive event. Now, they need that to be able to communicate for a possible man-made event, or they say perhaps a natural event that wipes out their ability to be able to communicate by cell phone. Now, sat phones are a little different than cell phones in that they go directly to satellite. And I'll talk about the different types of satellite systems we have for communications above us here in a minute. So 50 of the senators that were offered, and the whole Senate was offered cell phones, 50 senators took up the offer from the Senate Sergeant of Arms, Karen Gibson. She's a lieutenant general, retired. Ms. Gibson says that there may be a need for redundant, secure means of communications if there's a disruptive event. So if they're traveling to a foreign nation and lose contact, or involved in negotiations, losing contact, or some sort of disaster, military, weather, who knows. They're being offered these cell phones, or satellite phones. To tell you the truth, I'd like one. But anyway, moving on. They've been told to keep the satellite phones close during travel. There's no indications of which senators got to have access to the satellite phones. This is going to be paid for by federal funding for both the cell phones and for the airtime. The DSHS says that in a man-made or natural disaster, if communications were wiped out, this would be very important. And that's the Department of Homeland Security. So does Ms. Gibson or DHS anticipate such an event? We don't know. And we all know that there's a number of issues going on in the world. Let me turn off the noise around me. So how that's going to affect us if there's an event, I don't know. I don't know if you guys know. So Ms. Gibson spent 30 years in the U.S. military before her job as the Sergeant of Arms. Her announcement to her appointment as Sergeant at Arms in March of 2021 was by Senator Schumer of New York. She's a lieutenant general in the military. There were three ladies that were appointed at the same time: Lieutenant General Gibson, Kelly Fado, Jennifer Hemingway. This is the first time in history that the Sergeant of Arms leadership has all been led at the Senate by females, so that's interesting. There goes one glass ceiling. Good to hear, I suppose. So, Karen Gibson, when she was in the military, she was intelligence and cybersecurity director of intelligence for Central Command, and Central Command is one of 11 worldwide commands. Each one is responsible for what they call an AOR, an area of responsibility. So the one she was in was the Middle East, including Asia. All right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit. As long as we came up with these commands, I'm sure you all have questions about what are the commands. So the U.S. military commands are: Central Command is the Middle East. Indo-Pacific Command is from India to Hawaii, all through from India in the Indian Ocean all the way to Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean. NORTHCOM, or North Command, is North America, and that includes NORAD. Then you have Southern Command, and that's all of South America. You have Africa Command, or AFCOM, and that's all of Africa. You have EU Command, and or EUCOM, and that's all of Europe. And it's not just Europe that you typically think about. It's Europe and all of Russia, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So when we're talking Europe Command, we include Russia in Europe. Then we have the Space Command, and that's everything above 100 miles in altitude. Next, we have a U.S. Combatant Command. Now, the U.S. Combatant Command has 5 or 4 other commands in it. So you've got U.S. Special Operations Command, that's Special Forces. Okay. You have U.S. Transportation Command, that's Airlift, C-17s, the C-130s, C-5A Galaxies, and it includes Air Force One and Marine One. Then you have Strategic Command, and that's in control of our entire nuclear triad. So that would be our subs, our nuclear subs that can launch, not our fast attack subs, but our nuclear subs that can launch, our ICBMs, and our Strategic Command aircraft. And then there's Cyber Command, and that has to do with anything like optics or cell phone. Any of those communications are involved in Cyber Command. And all 11 of these are called the Unified Command, and this is what emerged following World War II. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about satellite systems. Now there's 5 satellite systems out there that I could find pretty quick, but I'm only going to talk about 4. The one I think that's the most interesting, probably has the greatest service, is Iridium, the Iridium satellite. And so for 500 minutes during a 12-month period, it's $824.95, and then 99 cents per additional minute. And the telephone itself for the cheapest one was $599. And that's a telephone like with no extras, so it doesn't like hook up to your laptop. It's not a Wi-Fi point, anything like that. The next satellite system is called Inmarsat, I-N-M-A-R SAT. And you can't buy the cell phone from Inmarsat. Inmarsat only rents you the phones, okay? And they charge you $89.95 per month for 100 minutes. And I don't know what they charge you after 100 minutes, but I can imagine it's pretty steep. Okay, the next one is Thurana, T-H-U-R-A-Y-A, Thurana. And their X5 Touch phone in their system is $1,399. Their XT Lite phone is just $546, and they cost $559 per, hold on, for 12 months, and they only give you a certain number of units, and it goes between 500 units and 2,591 units in a 12-month period. So I'm not sure exactly what that means. And then the next major one is called Global Star, and their cheapest telephone is like $399. This is information I got at SatMoto, and they have an unlimited plan for $960 for 12 months, and that's the cost. So we have 50 senators on satellite communications now if they need it. I hope they don't use it and abuse it. Okay, I've moved through page 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'm moving to page number 5. Now, if you're a business owner, this is anywhere in the United States, and you can get a COVID tax relief. That's a tax relief up to $26,000 per employee. So that's important to know. I saw that on the Bannon report there on, what was it called? War Room, that Lou Dobbs, the former news anchor that was let go, is calling for a church-style commission for excesses the government has done in affecting our freedom of speech for the last 8 years, of what he called political perversion. And he also talked about Biden's performance in Japan as being extraordinarily incredible leadership, tongue-in-cheek. All right, moving on. So we found out that the Democrats this weekend want to reopen the 14th Amendment without precedent or authority. It's a new gimmick trying to be able to get rid of the debt ceiling by using a presidential authorization. We'll see how that works. They want to go back to pre-pandemic spending. They all, trying to think of the name, Janet Yellen over at Department of Treasury wants to change the language of the full faith and credit of the American people to pay your own bill in the 14th Amendment, apparently. And she's also saying now that it won't be the end of June before the United States incurs a default if they don't increase their spending limit, but that it will happen on the 15th of June. On page 6. So Harnwell, Benjamin Harnwell, says the Pentagon is admitting to a $3 billion accounting error, evaluating their aid to Ukraine. So to give you an idea of what $3 billion is, you could buy here in Seattle, you could go over to Boeing and throw down $3 billion and pick up 3 777-9s. It's the largest cargo and passenger aircraft they have, 400 plus seats. So yeah, you could pick up 6 of them for that accounting error. And Mr. Harwell is wondering, will the Uniparty trip over itself in its haste to give what they call Zelensky, he was calling him 10% ski. His extra $3 billion bonus, he says. President Trump, during 4 years ago, just asked for the same amount to build the entire border wall. So that gives you an idea of how much that is. Okay, we have some information on Christopher Wray. So, Christopher Wray at the FBI, I'll just call him St. Christopher. St. Christopher used to be represent as an attorney Miles Wu against people that against a conglomeration of companies in China that were tied to the CCP. And as soon as then that conglomeration hired Ray's group to represent that conglomeration, and so he changed sides from one side of the case, Miles Wu, to the conglomeration of companies that were working in China. So, and then just after that, he got his directorship at the FBI. And, Miles Wu is the first one to give us all AI threat warnings. So this is kind of a big deal. And so St. Christopher couldn't really stay on the same side during that situation. Now, Benjamin Harwell has also said, according to the Foreign Policy magazine, that the Guardians of the International Rules-Based Order has finally admitted that their reign is over at the Foreign Policy magazine. And he says it's due to the flailing Biden administration's strategic instruments and leadership, which he says is pathetic. He says also that the Ukrainian dollars will never end coming from this administration, as it is the national foreign policy of the United States. Interesting to note. So that's Benjamin Harwell back again at the War Room. Steve Bannon's on Rumble. Moving on. Whistleblower Nate Kane says that the seventh floor of the FBI, now under Christopher Wray, is no longer capable of equal justice under law. And the reason for that was for the need of Miss Hillary Clinton to become president of the United States after the botched Benghazi raid. And so he's asking, how deep does the FBI rot go, which is a big deal. Now, according to the ACLJ, American ACLJ on YouTube, I'll just say that. The FBI spied on 27,000 of us in a 1 year time, or more than 270,000 times on American citizens, and with no ability for us to know about it. And they went before the foreign I forget the name of the court, and that's where we learned about this. And they didn't have any the foreign surveillance intelligence court. And these were all improperly used warrantless searches. They did it to call Americans as foreign agents without a warrant in 1 year. And so think about us all being tagged as, or at least 27,000 of us perhaps being tagged as domestic terrorists. So this is all comes under the part of the Bill of Rights of improper search and seizure. So this is the search part, not the seizure part. So that's pretty important to know about from the ACLJ. All right, Colonel McGregor was talking on the YouTube, and he says that Biden has now pledged F-16s to be sent to President Zelensky in Ukraine. And he questions whether they'll be able to train the pilots soon enough or before the war ends. And not only the pilots, they have to have the maintenance personnel to go with them. So here's the important part. To be trained on an F-16, it takes 2 to 4 years, okay, depending on your job type around it, whether it's maintenance, whether it's crew chiefs, whether it's electronics, whether it's engine shop, on and on. 2 to 4 years. Even pilots can take up to 4 years. But there's a big difference between how Ukrainian pilots fly the MiG-29 and how Americans fly the F-16. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So the MiG-29 is a mechanical jet. And what I mean by that is it's controlled by hydraulics, but the hydraulics are all actuated by mechanical means. So you have rudders and a stick, and you have to push the stick all the way forward to descend, pull it all the way back to climb, all the way to the left, to bank left, all the way to right, to bank right, push in rudders, left rudder to, let's see, I can't remember exactly if it's counter directional or directional. Anyway, it moves the tail rudder so it'll swing the airplane left or right without banking. Now it's a lot of movement in the MiG-29. If you look at YouTube videos, you can see those guys climbing all over that stick to fly that jet. Now in the F-16, it's a what we call an electric jet. It uses electronic potentiometers. So instead of moving a stick, 6.5, 7 inches to one side to bank, you move it 1/4 of an inch to the left to bank. And that's a full bank, that's a roll. So that's as far as you go on that stick. It's literally pressure. It's not moving the stick. And the same thing kind of with the rudders. It's not as big change with small movement on the rudders, but it's still a lot tighter. And so you can imagine a MiG pilot just getting into an F-16. They could literally flip that jet right over, just taking off, just trying to deal with side winds when they're taking off. They could flip the plane completely upside down just because of not knowing how sensitive that jet is. The MiG-29 was meant for a pilot to control. F-16 was an entirely different premise. it was a jet that you kind of strapped on. It was a jet designed to outfly the pilot, not the pilot fly the jet. So if you took some guy that was used to flying a MiG-29 in Ukraine and put him in an F-16, he could literally black himself right out, and that jet would keep pulling those G's forever. So it would, after he went limp, straighten itself out, and he would come back. But if he were to hold it to the side forever, it would black him out, and that would be it. He just couldn't keep up. His body would never be able to keep up. So that's a very big difference. Also, our targeting systems, our flight control systems, our inertial nav systems, our GPS systems, our communication systems, our electronic ELT systems for jamming systems, all these are radically different than what the Ukrainian pilots would be used to. And so the Ukrainians think they could be trained up in 6 months, but I tend to agree with Colonel McGregor that it would likely be more than 2 years. So, yeah. But President Biden has said at the G7 that training of the F-16 pilots will begin in the United States, and that other countries throughout the world are free to donate F-16s to Ukraine. So there's 26 different countries that have bought or been part of building or fielding the F-16. It's what we call in the United States an international jet. It's a fourth generation, meaning that it was built right after it came to life right after Vietnam. Vietnam, we had a real problem with dogfighting the MiG-22s, the MiG-19s, the MiG-17s, because they could turn so fast. And our missile technology wasn't that great yet, and a lot of our fighters didn't have guns because they were always going to, the idea was is that they were going to be in interceptors. They were not going to be in dogfighters before Vietnam, because they just thought we could possibly have a war with the Soviet Union with long-range bombers. They hadn't taken into account that we may be involved in a dogfight war like we were involved in with Korea with the, trying to think of the name of them, the F-89 Sabres. I'm having to pull some of this information out of my brain here. So we've moved along here. We're all the way to page 8. Oh my gosh. I hope I don't get to the end too soon. Anyway, so when the F-16s, we would have called those jets third generation aircraft. And now we're on to the fourth generation. That would have been the F-15 and F-16. Because our kill-to-loss rate in Vietnam was so bad, the Navy instituted what they called Fighter Weapons School. You guys all probably know by the name of Top Gun. And the United States Air Force later saw what the Navy fighter weapons training was, and so they instituted their own called Red Flag. And these were instituted by a group of pilots known colloquially through the Pentagon as the Fighter Mafia. Now, the Fighter Mafia said, you cannot field an airplane unless, first of all, it can dogfight. We don't want any planes that can't dogfight. It's okay if they can do intercept. Intercept work is fine, but they have to be able to dogfight first, meaning they have to be able to, 15, 16 to 1. That's the kind of kill ratios they needed. They didn't need 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. The Navy was good at the end of Vietnam of getting, I believe, up to 6 or 9 to 1 with the F-4s, but they wanted to be able to get, to the high teens to 1 kills to loss rate. So they developed 2 aircraft. One was called the F-15, and it was a twin-engine version of what we call now the F-16. Now, there's a difference between the F-15 and the F-16. The F-15, like the MiG-29, is a mechanical bird, but it has all the electronic targetability of the F-16, and so it can fly well over 2,000 miles an hour. It can dogfight with anything in the sky. We've never lost an F-15 to another aggressor against an F-16 since it's been made. It's, arguably one of the best aircraft, air superiority aircraft ever built. Now, the F-16, on the other hand, was made to be an attack aircraft, meaning it was designed to be able to fight its way in, drop its ordnance on whatever's on the ground that it needs to attack, and then if it needs to, fight its way out against any aggressor. So the F-16 is what they want to send to Ukraine. Now, not all F-16s are equal. For instance, some of our export F-16s don't have the complete possibility of all the systems that the American F-16s have, especially the F-16s, the latest ones that are being built. I believe those are like Block 70 and greater. So those are considered the 4th generation fighters and attack. Now, the MiG-29, and I think it's the Su-35, are the Russian equivalent or the Soviet equivalent of the 4th generation aircraft. And so we would have our attack aircraft going up against Russia's air-to-air superiority, lower level air-to-air superiority aircraft. The Su-25 is their attack aircraft. They only have attack aircraft or they have superiority aircraft. They don't have in-between aircraft like we do in the United States. In the United States, we have attack fighter aircraft like the F-16s or the FA-18s, which is fighter attack aircraft. But they didn't call them fighter attack aircraft when the 16s came along because it was earlier in time, and then later on they said, well, we better name them fighter attack aircraft. So that's how the FA-18 got its name. So the FA-18 is a 4th generation. The 16 and the 15, they're 4th generation. And the F-22 Raptor, that's a 5th generation. And the F-35 is a 5th generation. Now, when we talk about these generations, it doesn't always mean the same thing to each country. So in one country, a 5th generation may mean partial I forget the name. Partial stealth with a lot of electronic integration between aircraft that it flies with, like tankers, like electronic surveillance aircraft, like AWACS aircraft. Whereas the United States, we look at 5th generation as primarily stealth. And then we look at sixth generation as primarily satellite and full electronic integration with other aircraft. So like our F-35 is a sixth generation aircraft, and our F-22 is a fifth generation aircraft because the F-22 doesn't have the full load of electronics. So we're sending an early version of our F-16s is what we would be going to Ukraine. They have been designed and built at the end of the 80s, early 90s. We're talking 30-year-old aircraft. And Colonel McGregor seems to believe, and I tend to go along with him, that it's not going to be enough soon enough to make a difference. And not only will it not be enough soon enough to make a difference, it would be the wrong aircraft in the first place, because an F-16 should be going into the battle with a air superiority fighter over the top of it. Because yes, it can fight its way in and fight its way out, but as far as an air-to-air killer, it wasn't designed to be its primary job. All right, so I hope that helps, folks. Does anybody have any questions?
The solar flares.
So, the solar flares. Moving on. So, Ellie was telling me about, we've been having some solar flares recently, and the solar flares are greater than the size of the Earth. So, it's hard to really quantify the size of the sun next to a planet here on Earth. So if you took all of the parking facilities in Long Island and New York, we're talking down near New York City, not the whole state, and you took all those parking lots, that would be the size of the sun. And if you took one of those parking lots out of all of those parking lots, that would be the size of all the planets combined. And if you took 2 or 3 cars out of that one parking lot, that would be the size of the Earth. So when the sun has a mass coronal ejection that may be heating up the Earth right now, causing these volcanoes and these very excited seismic events, the sun drives the heating of the core of the Earth, because remember, we're in the shadow of the magnetosphere of the sun, and it washes over the Earth. And a lot of what comes from the sun permeates the Earth. Now, there's these subatomic particles called neutrinos. Now, neutrinos have a neutral charge, and so they're not attracted to anything in the Earth. And right now, as we're speaking, thousands and thousands of neutrinos, if you're anywhere in the area of sunshine, just came from the sun, went through you, and went blowing through the Earth, okay? And they came out the other side of the Earth, somebody in the dark, whatever's on the exact opposite side of the Earth, blew through them and hit nothing at the speed of light. They have to go 5 miles deep in a lead mine in the absolute darkness with what they call deuterium, heavy water, and wait for a strike in water in a lead mine for months to even have one single flash of light of having one neutrino strike anything. And, you know, there's the amount of neutrinos that went through that water, these huge vats of water in this mine, are numberless, just to have a single strike. So you can imagine with just the neutrinos coming from the sun, what the number of charged particles coming from the sun. Because the vast majority of particles that come from the sun are charged particles. It turns hydrogen into helium. That's the functioning way the sun generates energy, and as it converts two hydrogen atoms into one helium atom, there's an itty bitty fraction of mass loss. That's just the weight of the atoms, kind of in the territory numbers of a single neutrino. Really small amounts of mass. And when that mass doesn't make it to the new helium, that little bit of liberated mass is what creates the energy the sun provides. So just a part of the mass of an atom creates hideous amounts of energy, and it's throwing that energy, at all the planets all the time. And so when you start having coronal mass ejections, which are larger than the Earth itself, that means a huge flare-up starts very deep down in the Earth and makes its way up to the corona, the hottest part of the sun, and then flares up. That's the energy from the fusion of the two hydrogen atoms being made into one helium atom. So, yeah, that's why we're getting these volcanoes and everything going. The center of the Earth is heating way up, and these charged particles they're really attracted to our magnetosphere, and when they make it to our magnetosphere, they're very directed towards the iron core of our Earth. And just above the molten iron core of the Earth is where the vast majority of the heat within the Earth is created. And then it wells up to the more plastic places, and then finally up towards the surface of the Earth. So there's basically a molten nuclear furnace being driven by the sun and by sporadic fission from subatomic particles within the Earth that creates all this heat. And the temperature of the ocean and the weather, to a huge degree, is driven by that. And so we're talking of thousands of degrees in one of these volcanoes. And then as that ash and whatnot flies up, within 100 miles, the temperature is just a few degrees below absolute zero. And when I'm talking about absolute zero, I'm talking about stopping the orbit of electrons around an atom. They become completely stopped. And so when you see our satellites and whatnot in space, they're functioning in an absolute vacuum with only just a couple of degrees Celsius above absolute zero. So, does that help you, Ellie?
Sure did.
Okay. So that's the physics part of William got excited, I guess, and went off to the physics department there. So our next little thing that I have here on page 9 is President Biden met with our Quad allies at the G7. And
William,
he met,
real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, that was over in Hiroshima. And now do you realize you said there was a 4.2 earthquake there?
So at Toshima, near Hiroshima,
okay.
They're sister cities, okay?
Okay.
So Toshima in Japan had a 5.1 magnitude earthquake at 1.24 miles deep. That's shallow.
They would have felt it for about 100,
that's
200
like,
miles.
3 kilometers deep? No, it's 2 kilometers deep. it's really shallow. It's right under your feet. They had a 5.1 slip and bounce right near where they were having the G7. So is somebody helping that earthquake out in that area? Now, we had, I'm sorry, near in the Banda Sea, near the Indian Ocean, we had a 5.2. We had one in Tonga, the Solomon Islands, and Loyalty Islands, which is in the I can't remember the name of the sea, the Coral Sea between Australia and New Zealand. So yeah, all in the South Pacific. And not seeing really big ones anyplace else. Now we were seeing some 3s and 4s, like in Romania and in Albania. And we also saw some bigger ones, 3s and 4s, the Dominican Republic and in the Virgin Islands area. But we're not seeing the really big ones like we were seeing in the South Pacific. So that leads me to wonder, and I know it leads Ellie to wonder whether some of the governments aren't playing some of these electronic wars with each other. Now, we know China has the capacity, the same as the United States. Any of the G7 nations have the capacity to engage in weather, seismic,
HAARP
type warfare, affecting the people, psychology of the people. So yeah, and China was not too happy about this G7 summit at all. So that's something to talk about and think about, I guess. So President Biden met with the Prime Minister of Japan, and he met with also India and I believe Australia. And while he was over there, he met with Korea. Okay. But what I was concerned about was while he was meeting with Japan and India and Australia, he canceled his trip to Australia and he canceled his trip to Papua New Guinea. And this is all brought to light by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Also, at the same time this was happening at the G7, the Great Seven at Hiroshima, Finland and Sweden were submitting their applications for full NATO membership, and was being announced by Jake Sullivan. And the president is or has welcomed the president of Finland and the prime minister of Sweden to the White House to coordinate what they call a pathway forward. They will also compare notes over the war between Russia and Ukraine. They said that they're going to speak to the public and the press to reaffirm their shared vision for the peaceful and secure Euro-Atlantic region, i.e. NATO. Now, I listened to this whole statement by Sullivan, and I never heard once in there freedom. They always talk about peace, they talk about security, but they never, ever talk about freedom of the people. And that just irritates me. I mean, if Ukraine and Russia are fighting for security, who's fighting for freedom? You know, it bothers me. I just like what the American people have had. Okay. So, and he also said when the president went to Japan, he was also going to the Republic of Korea. the reason he was going to the G7 was to rally the free world in defense of Ukraine. And he was doing it, he said he was doing it in China's backyard. So the G7, they also called the U.S.-Asian Summit. And they welcomed 9 leaders from Southeast Asia. And some of these came virtually. And they were involved in economic security, technology, and energy. That was the big thing of the Asian Summit during the G7. And also remember, there's also a summit between the Quad. And he was asked, he's going to go to South Korea and Korea with his newly elected President Yoon to strengthen the U.S.-ROK relationship and improve the relationship between the Republic of South Korea and Japan in steadfastness against China. Now, he also said, this is great, just wonderful, that he notified China that they were going to be discussing this so as they could have better deconfliction, I guess. I don't know. It bothers me the ties that this administration has to China, but that may just be me, but I don't think so. And as he went to the G7, intelligence now suggests there's going to be more missile tests from North Korea. And that's not just short-range missiles. This includes medium and long-range missiles. They said short and long-range. Well, you either have short, medium, or long. You don't just have short or long. They usually run the whole gamut if they're going to go to long-range. So we're just going to say short, medium, and long-range missile tests. Now, those have gone out into the Pacific. But, a long-range missile can go, 8,000 miles. That's kind of the stuff that can reach the west coast of the United States. It's not a joke. Jake, Friday in his talk at the White House, he came to the press room. He talked about Russia's war of aggression. Now, I haven't heard those terms used in a while. I don't know if you guys remember the Saddam's war of aggression on Kuwait or the Iraqi war of aggression. Anytime I hear war of aggression, it's like you're talking to the people who actually control how wars are fought. These are the people at the very top of the pinnacle of power that use these terms. These aren't terms used by generals. These aren't terms used by senators. These are terms used by people who are in control of fighting. Now, during the Johnson administration in Vietnam, they had special rules of engagement. So everything that happened in Vietnam had to be of any major significance, had to be okayed by the White House at the time it was initiated, meaning it wasn't days before, it was minutes before the initiation. Came straight from the White House. And we had some great math whizzes during the time. They called them the great math whizzes. They had the combed over, fine hair. They came from MIT. One guy's name was McNamara. And they're the guys that came up with this idea of body count. You could win by body count, not by taking and holding territory. And that's the sense I get when I hear Jake talking, is that he may be one of the people that are involved in how we're prosecuting this proxy war in Ukraine. Now, I personally wonder whether we're going to run out of weapons or Ukraine's going to run out of people first. But this is way bloodier than Vietnam was. If you take the total number of KIA killed in action in the United States and, the number of killed in action with North Vietnam was much, much greater than the United States. Still, the number of killed in action between Ukraine and Russia is greater in this 1-year war in Ukraine than all of the almost 10-year war in Vietnam. It's a meat grinder. And the United States and its NATO allies has only given Ukraine what it needs to basically hold the line. They haven't given them anything like extra so that they could win. It's like they offer up the F-16s, but they don't offer weasels to knock out the surface-to-air missile sites. They don't offer the attack aircraft to maintain air superiority while the air superiority aircraft to maintain air superiority while the attack aircraft go in. They're not giving them the AWACS to be able to direct the attack aircraft in on weapon systems that come up at the spur of the moment. So the pilots don't get directed intelligence and can be like an air traffic controller sends in. They don't have mid-air refueling to top off their tanks so that they can loiter. They're not going to have the hot pads to load, rearm, and fuel all at the same time. So when an F-16 comes back, it's got to be refueled. It's got to be rearmed, everything that hangs from the wings, and it has to have all the munitions and oxygen pumped into the oxygen tanks all at the same time. And if they've flown through any toxic clouds or nerve agents or anything like that, then they have to be doused with an anti-nerve agent and rinsed off before they can even come into the hot pad. And those jets are designed so that they continue to fly continually. The only thing that changes in them is weapons, where they go to attack, and pilots. So the airplanes remain constantly in operation. And that's not the way the Ukrainians use them. And if they don't use them that way, they can be easily targeted by Russian surface-to-air or surface-to-ground missile systems. And so if you leave most of the aircraft that get lost in many of the wars are airplanes that are sitting on the ground that aren't moving. You don't want them not moving, because the second they're not moving, they're a target. Okay. Moving on from that. Wars of aggression. Yeah. All right. Jake says that Russia is bombarding Odessa so that shipments of food from its port cannot transit the Black Sea. Russia is engaged in an effort to blockade Ukrainian food shipments, outbound food shipments, to forced that would be used to feed peoples of Africa, the Americas, South America, Asia. And basically the blockade is designed to drive up the price of food worldwide. So Jake, not the president, Jake's up Sullivan is publicly calling on Russia. So he has the authority as the National Security Advisor to call on President Putin to end the attacks on Odessa to help in humanitarian shipments of food out of Odessa to aid the world. I wonder where he got that kind of power. Again, you know, I wonder what the guy's doing. Okay, Haiti. So for 3 weeks now, 3.5 weeks now, there has been no change in the violence in Haiti. So it's not a civil war, it's a vigilante war going on in Haiti between the gangs and the general populace. And it has been extremely grotesque. These gang members are not making it their way to jail at all. They're called what they call as arraignment. They put tires around them and tie them up, put tires around them in the middle of the street and incinerate them. So it's gruesome. All right, moving back to Ukraine again. So U.S. intelligence says that Putin continues to bank on the fracturing of the Western resilience to continue this war in Ukraine or breaking up NATO. So, Mr. Sullivan has talked about the new $40 billion, well, it was going to be $33 billion package, but then the president added another $7 billion to the package to Ukraine. And Mr. Sullivan believes there may be some pushback in Congress, but expects an overwhelming bipartisan vote from the Senate. And that overwhelming bipartisan vote from the Senate is what Steve Bannon was calling, let's see, what was he calling? He was calling it the Uniparty. And Sullivan is touting he's saying that the United States will pull together behind the brave people of Ukraine in their hour of need. And I'll just add, not to mention the dying people of Ukraine due to the, well, can I say bad words, Ellie?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll just, so due to the piss poor.
Now, William, one thing that I seen today
Jake's
was
policy shop. Does that work?
Yeah. Now I heard the G7 wants to do heavy sanctions on Russia. Russia's very upset about this, and sanctions on China. I don't know if you heard about that, but
well, yeah, China's not too happy about this whole G7 thing, and they could change their whole complexion around not sending arms to Russia to help with their war on Ukraine, and also not being interested in peace with Ukraine. So that's why I say Jake's policy shop might be just going up in flames here. I'm not too impressed. He reminds me of a mathematician that knows nothing about war. I mean, these guys are great with politics. They're great with bending people's minds. They're great with finding votes. They're great with cheating here and there. But you can't cheat on a battlefield. It's different when bullets are flying, and when you're catching bullets, everything changes. I don't think these guys so far away from everything really understand it from a visceral level. of what's going on. I don't even think they can quantify those numbers of human beings in their head. So anyway.
Karen's got a question.
Yeah.
I thought NATO wasn't allowed to get involved.
So NATO isn't involved specifically because they're not putting fighters in Ukraine. What NATO is doing is supporting Ukraine with weapons, not with people to use the weapons. So NATO is involved in a proxy war with the United States over or against Russia. Now, why are the Western Europeans getting themselves involved in this? Well, what happened a few years ago was before 2014. So what was it, 2012-ish? Russia ran south into Georgia and subsumed the nation of Georgia into the Russian Federation.
I know we got a lady in, not only a family member, a friend of a family member, but I found someone else that is in Georgia, and they agreed for Russia to move in and take Georgia because they were starving, and Russia was able to feed and take care of them medically and all that. So it was kind of like a mutual agreement, of what I'm being told, but by both.
Yeah, but it also inflamed the neighbors next door to Georgia, and they had all these terrorist attacks as well. So there was a number of things went on. But looking at it from the Western Europeans' viewpoint, remember, we have to look at from the viewpoint of the actors, not, our idea.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about NATO. I'm not.
Yeah.
But okay. They went south into Georgia. Then in 2014, they took over Crimea, and they built their super bridge and railway bridge into Crimea. Mm-hmm. So there's two nations. And then what happened a year ago in February is they didn't just attack the Donbass, Luhansk, and Donetsk region. They attacked the entire Ukraine. So NATO's looking at it from the aspect of, if we don't stop Russia from marching across Ukraine, we're next. And if you look at the history of Putin, given the other operations he had before this last operation, they would be right to make that assumption. Now, whether it's the actual thinking of Putin himself, I don't know. You don't know. We don't know. There's no way to know. But if your borders are on the line, if Belize had suddenly stormed a third of the way across Mexico, would we be concerned that Belize is going to storm our border and take over the United States? We'd really be straight up concerned. We'd be really concerned. We'd have our military right down on the border right away. Well, that's what's going on in Europe and Eurocom. So Eurocom, the EU, NATO, the United States, parts of the National or the Security Council of the United Nations, these are all affiliated groups, meaning they're parts and pieces of different groups, but many of them are parts of NATO. And the difference between the EU groups and NATO is the United States NATO is the United States and Canada then gets involved when it's a NATO issue. Not Australia, just United States and Canada. So I hope that answers that question. Additionally, Big Salt, did somebody say something? No? Okay. Isn't that the same thing? No, it's not quite the same thing, because there's different commanders for each organization. So NATO has its own commander. The United States Integrated Command Structure has its own commander. They talk with each other, and then they come up with a strategy through our politicians, but they don't get to act independently or in concert with each other without our president and the EU Council in Brussels getting together and coming up with the plan to move forward. And so that's part of what's going on at the G7. Sullivan says the theme is energy in Europe and also in the Indo-Pacific, mutually trying to reinforce access to energy supplies. But they're not going to drill here. He's a sharp guy. This guy. So you've heard of the AUK-US partnership. That's Australia, the UK, and the United States partnership. The president wants to be a strong AUK-US partnership, but at the same time, he canceled his trip to Australia. So, what does that mean? I don't know. So again, on his trip to Asia, the message is a vision to democracies and open societies of the world to shape the rules of the road and to define the security architecture of the regions of Asia, to reinforce a strong, powerful, their strength, their power of their historic alliances in that region. So that was the Asia part of the trip. Also, while the president was there, according to Sullivan, the president is excited to reaffirm the United States-Israel relationship, but does not have at this time a timetable for an announcement of a trip to Israel. They're hitting on all cylinders. I don't know. They scare me a bit. So, and according to Jake Sullivan, the president feels that this trip to Asia puts wind at his back on security and economic challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. The president did not visit, however, being asked whether he would go to the DMZ in Korea, that's a demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. The president did not visit the DMZ between the South and North Korea, and Sullivan said he would not. So that's that. I believe President Trump did meet with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. Maybe Singapore. I think it might have been Malaysia. Anyway, they met for a couple of days, and that would have been the equivalent of meeting at the DMZ, but that's not what's happened here. Now, moving back to Colonel McGregor, he says that it's likely that Bakhmut has fallen despite what the President Zelensky has said at the G7. He believes it, and he also believes that Bakhmut may very well end up being the equivalent of the Tet Offensive for the the United States in Vietnam. It might be their final reversal, or it could, because the loss of people from Russia, be their Stalingrad, where they lost so many people. So it's really, Bakhmut had an aircraft manufacturing facility there, a minor one, not a major one. And for all intents and purposes, Hiroshima is a good analogy of what's left of Bakhmut. It's a moonscape. The only places that Zelensky's troops are holding on at all are some really, really well-built steel reinforced buildings that the Russians haven't yet been able to completely level. And the only reason Russia hasn't leveled them is they fear that the Russian sympathizing citizens of Bakhmut may be in the basement of those blockhouses. Now, the reason is the Ukrainian troops got concerned that the Russian sympathizing citizens of Bakhmut may have been giving information to the Russians about the Ukrainian operations. So they basically not took them prisoner, but put them into the basements of the protected basements of these buildings where they could be isolated away from the fighting troops so the troops could engage in their operations. So they're not prisoners, but they also can't leave while the fighting's going on because they don't trust the transfer of information. Kind of like the United States didn't trust that some of the Japanese may have transmitted information to Imperial Japan, even though they were citizens here in the United States. So I hope that helps. Next, I believe I said it this last time, is the United Kingdom has sent some cruise missiles to Ukraine with a caveat that they not be used on Russian civilian citizens, but only Russian military within Ukrainian territory. All right, Elliot, I'm done with my program, but we're going to have Memorial Day in a week, and I have come up with a song of the day if somebody wants to write it down. And it's called Far From Home, and it's by Five Finger Death Punch. They're a real big band that does a lot of tributes to our military, and if you listen to it, it's a great song. It's not like some of the other ones I've sent you to listen to. So it's just, it's a great Memorial Day song. And I'll have some other songs of the day for Memorial Day. So you veterans out there, and if there's some out there for some reason within the shot of my voice that are POWs, we haven't forgot you. Okay, that's the end of my program. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And maybe at about 5 o'clock tomorrow, I'll be with you again with other news. And you know the difference between Monday and Tuesday. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose of the news that comes out, because the news releases really happen hard on Mondays. So I hope to have a bunch more information if it turns out that Ellie is able to, turn me on here on Investigator News 2 after all of her appointments tomorrow. So everybody, thank you for being here. Please like and subscribe, share with anybody you think might enjoy the information that we put out. And I hope not too much of my opinion showed up, and mostly the news made it out today. So, okay, good evening, and we'll see you maybe tomorrow, and for sure Thursday with Ellie. All right, bye-bye.
All right.